Hey, welcome. Enjoy the content. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Colin stopped in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, silently observing the woman with whom he'd spent the last decade of his life. Madison was on the phone, speaking with an easy, carefree tone, though her eyes seemed distant. Holding the phone in one hand, she organized a few papers into a leather folder with the other. She discussed reservations, dates, and flights. It all seemed like part of her usual work routine, but there was something in her smile. Something that made Colin's chest tighten. When the call ended, she hung up with a casual, "See you soon," placing the phone down on the table without a second thought. Turning to Colin, she casually mentioned she'd be leaving the next day for a business trip. It was a 3-day trip, she said, important for her career. Colin remained silent for a moment, trying to understand the suddenness of her announcement. She hadn't mentioned anything about a trip all month. He asked her where she was going, who she'd be with, and why she was telling him about it now. She hesitated for a second, her eyes flickering before quickly returning to their usual calmness, which made Colin uneasy. "It's with Jason," she explained, the director at her company. At first, she tried to frame it as a team-building trip, an opportunity to align strategies. But when Colin pressed her, asking why it was just Jason and not the whole team, her facade dropped. She admitted that she and Jason had grown closer over time, and that the trip held personal significance as well. She called it networking, but the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, left no room for doubt. She was involved with another man. Colin's chest tightened even more, a mixture of disbelief and a sharp sting of shame. Yet Madison remained unaffected. In fact, she took a sip of water, leaned against the counter, and spoke about Jason as if she were discussing any other colleague. She said Jason was ambitious, full of vision, and that working with him inspired her. She went on to say that things with Colin had become predictable, that he'd stopped surprising her, stopped taking care of her, and had grown complacent. The words stung, each one seeming like it was rehearsed, as if she had been preparing for this conversation long before it happened. She said there was no longer any spark in their marriage, that it had become a dull routine. The way she spoke about their years together was more painful than any physical betrayal could have been. She didn't yell, didn't become emotional, didn't falter in her words. It was as if the decision had already been made, as if the story had ended in her mind long before she'd even said it out loud. Colin stood there, struggling to make sense of it. Part of him wanted to ask if this was real. Was this truly the woman who once swore eternal love and partnership? But something stronger rose within him, a sense of dignity that refused to indulge in tears or humiliation. He met her eyes and simply listened. He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. He didn't beg. At that moment, more than anger, what he felt was a deep, profound disappointment. Madison moved away, gathered the folder of documents, and headed upstairs, saying she needed to finish packing. And that was it. No hugs, no requests to reconsider, no pleas to think it over. She was in a hurry. Colin stood there, processing. A few minutes passed as the weight of everything settled in. Slowly, it all began to make sense. The delayed messages, the half-hearted excuses, the canceled dinners. He realized, in that moment, that he had been living alone for quite some time. It had taken him until today to truly see it. It was like waking from a long, deep sleep. The love that had once sustained him had transformed into clarity, and with that clarity came action. This wasn't a moment for drama, but for strategy, a response not of anger, but of measured intelligence. It was the end of one chapter, but perhaps the beginning of something much more significant. By the afternoon, Madison finished packing her suitcase. At no point did she revisit what she had said, as if it had already been decided. She moved around the house with a detached calm, like someone who didn't owe anything to anyone. Colin watched her from a distance, the silence between them heavier than any argument could have been. She carefully picked out her clothes, sorted through papers, confirmed her flight, and made a brief phone call. She didn't try to justify herself, didn't attempt to soften the mood. She acted as if this were just another ordinary business trip, though they both knew what it really meant. By dinner, there was no conversation. Madison heated up something from the fridge, eating at the counter. Colin stayed away, simply drinking a glass of water before heading to the bedroom. They both stayed there, each on their own side of the bed, silent. For the first time, the space they shared felt alien, devoid of warmth, devoid of connection. Madison spent some time in the bathroom, preparing herself, as if getting ready for something important. The air was thick with unspoken words, but neither of them said anything. The reality of what was happening hung between them like a thick fog. When she returned, she lay down. Colin was already turned to the opposite side, awake, motionless, pretending to sleep. She turned off the light, and minutes later the sound of rhythmic breathing indicated that she had fallen asleep. He remained awake for hours, still his chest tight. Sleeping next to someone who has already chosen another path is a silent form of torture. The next morning, Madison got up before the alarm rang. She showered, dressed with the same attention as someone heading to an interview. She gathered the last items, picked up her suitcase, and as she left the room said simply, "I'll be back on Monday." Colin, sitting on the edge of the bed, only responded with a slight nod. She left through the door as if going to her usual job. No kiss, no farewell glance, no attempt at reconciliation or guilt, just the absence of everything that once united them. Colin remained motionless for a few seconds. No sigh, no gesture, just the distant sound of the car engine driving away. When he was sure Madison had left, he stood up. He went straight to the office and turned on the computer. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were firm. He typed precisely, "Private investigator, Clearwater area." Several results appeared, but he read each name carefully. He didn't want amateurs or curious people. He needed someone discreet, professional, effective. He visited websites, read reviews, looked at photos, compared prices until he found an agency that seemed trustworthy. He called. The voice on the other end of the line was confident, direct. Colin explained the situation without embellishment. His wife had traveled for 3 days with the director of the company where she worked, and he needed proof, photos, records, anything that confirmed what she had already admitted. He provided the details accurately, full names, hotel address, flight times. He sent photos of his wife and detailed a few more pieces of information. The investigator took notes professionally and promised results within 48 hours. He said he had a local team and they would start immediately. Colin hung up the phone feeling something he hadn't felt in days. Control. Still with the email open, he wrote to a trusted lawyer. He wouldn't use the evidence just for revenge. He wanted to prepare the divorce quietly, quickly, with a solid legal basis. The pain he carried was deep, but it had transformed into action. He wasn't seeking confrontation, he was seeking justice. He wanted to close the chapter with the same dignity he had offered throughout their years of marriage. The silence of the house was now an ally. Each decision made that morning seemed to lift a weight off his chest. For the rest of the day, he maintained his routine as best he could. He ate lunch alone, returned to work, answered calls, but inside everything had changed. He no longer saw himself as the deceived man, but as someone who had awakened. The end had begun there at the kitchen door when Madison confessed. But now he was writing the conclusion with his own hands, and he wouldn't let it be in vain. In the late afternoon, the investigator confirmed they were already on the case. They reported that Madison and Jason had been seen entering the hotel together, that they were in the same suite, that they'd gone out for dinner side by side. Colin read the message and closed his phone slowly. No tears, no shock, just the confirmation that he had made the right decision. The marriage had ended long before the suitcase was packed. The difference was that now everything was documented. That night, for the first time, he slept with the bedroom door slightly ajar. The house was empty, but he didn't feel afraid. It was as if finally the air had cleared. The pain still existed, but it was tamed. It was the price of freedom, and within him, something new began to merge, the certainty that he deserved more. Much more was yet to happen, but tone thing he already knew. Madison had no idea what was coming. On Monday afternoon, exactly at the expected time, Colin heard the car pull up in front of the house. He stayed still in silence, watching through the living room window. He recognized the sound of the engine, the way the door slammed shut, the sound of the suitcase wheels rolling along the sidewalk. He knew Madison would return that way, as if she had just gone to handle a routine work matter. No burden, no expression of regret. She had no idea what awaited her. Colin had spent the last 3 days organizing everything with precision. He had received the evidence, reviewed every image, read the reports, consulted the lawyer, sorted the papers. Everything was printed, compiled in a black folder, left prominently in the center of the dining table, visible, impossible to ignore. When Madison entered through the front door, she wore the same coat she had left in. She greeted with a forced hi, expecting a normal reaction. She looked at her husband as if nothing had happened, perhaps anticipating a comment about the trip or the time away, but Colin remained silent. His eyes were fixed on the folder on the table. Madison, confused, set her suitcase next to the couch and walked over to the table. She touched the folder, opened it. It took her only a few seconds to understand the contents. The photos were arranged in sequence with dates and times. She turned one page, then another, trying to hide her tension. Next to the images were the divorce papers already filled out. And at the end of the folder, a handwritten letter by Colin. She read it in silence, her face gradually changing. The coldness she had carried until then began to crack. When she finished, she raised her eyes and found Colin standing at the doorway to the hall, watching. She tried to speak, but he gestured with his hand for her to stop. He simply said that the marriage had ended the moment she decided to cross a line with no return. That her choices had consequences and now she had to deal with them. Madison, overcome with a mix of surprise and desperation, tried to argue. She said things were confusing, that the trip didn't mean as much as it seemed, that her relationship with Jason wasn't official. But each word came out weak without conviction. Colin remained firm. He repeated that trust had been destroyed, and that he had already taken all the necessary legal steps. He informed her she would have a few days to remove her belongings from the house, and that her lawyer could contact the office he had hired. She persisted. She tried to approach him, but Colin stepped back. He said there was no more room for discussion. Madison then lost control. She began to cry, asking how he could do this to her. She shouted that he was being cruel, but what hit her hardest was his serenity. Colin, with steady eyes, replied that he was simply ending what she herself had buried, that it wasn't about revenge, but self-respect. Madison, unsure what to do, grabbed her phone, dialed someone, then hung up before they answered. The mask of control and self-confidence had fallen. For the first time, she seemed lost. She left the house about an hour later, taking only the suitcase she had brought back from the trip. She tried to say she would return for the rest, but Colin simply responded that everything would be arranged with the lawyer. She didn't insist. She got into the car, started it, and drove away without looking back. From the gate, he watched until the car disappeared from the street. He didn't feel relief, but he also didn't feel regret. It was necessary. A surgical pain cutting deep, but preventing the soul from rotting. He went back inside, collected the documents from the table, locked them in a drawer, and took a deep breath. He had weathered the storm without screaming, without dragging himself, without losing himself. Colin knew exactly what he had in his hands. The photos he received from the detective weren't just compromising images. They were evidence reports with times, locations, dates. Madison and Jason using a hotel room paid for with company money, dining on corporate cards, toasting while their world began to crumble and they had no idea. In silence, he gathered everything. He created a dossier with every detail, organized the evidence, and attached it all to a cold and direct email sent to the board of directors of the company where they both worked. No signature, just facts and a question. Is this the kind of behavior you reward with leadership positions? 2 days later, both were called to an extraordinary meeting. The company launched an internal investigation. The accusation was serious. Misuse of corporate funds for personal purposes, including stays at resorts, expensive meals, and private transportation, all justified as strategic networking. But the images told another story. The committee had no doubts. Jason was fired for improper conduct. So was Madison. Both were terminated for directly violating the company's compliance policy and misusing company resources. Entire careers collapsed in a single morning. Hours after the dismissal, Colin's phone rang. It was her. Madison, distraught, yelling on the other end of the line. "You destroyed my life. What did you do?" Colin listened for a few seconds in insolence. She continued. "You sent those pictures, didn't you? How could you have the nerve?" And that's when he lost his patience. His voice rose firm, loaded with pent-up anger. "Nerve, you betrayed me to my face and talked to me about nerve. Get out of my life, Madison. Get out of my life with your lover and your rotten pride." He hung upon her without giving her a chance to respond. His blood still pulsed in his temples. It was weeks of suppressed rage erupting in a single sentence, and he didn't regret it for a second. Half an hour later, Madison received another call. It was Jason, but his voice, once full of charm and promises, was now filled with hatred. "Your husband ruined my career. I was exposed, humiliated. They kicked me out without even letting me clean out my desk. This is your fault." She tried to speak, stammered something about facing it together, finding a way, but Jason cut her off sharply. "You think we have something? Spare me. You were just a distraction. A diversion that now cost us both dearly. Stay out of my life before I drag you into the lawsuit, too." And he hung up. Madison stood there in shock. The ground she thought was firm beneath her feet had simply collapsed. She lost her job. She lost her lover. She lost respect, and above all, she lost Colin, the one person who for years had stood by her side when no one else did. The taste of humiliation was bitter, and for the first time, she felt the fall without anyone to lean on. For years passed since the day Madison left Colin's house for the last time. Her world crumbled more than she ever imagined. She tried to find another job, but the scandal followed her like a shadow. She started living off small contracts, moving from city to city, trying to escape the looks that seemed to know too much. She never heard from Jason again. He vanished. Some said he went abroad, others that he fell into depression. Madison, on the other hand, remained silent, living off scraps, reaping everything she had sown with reckless choices. One day, leaving a supermarket downtown, she heard loud laughter coming from the sidewalk across the street. Instinctively, she looked without thinking much, and there, like a punch to the chest, she saw him, Colin, but different from everything she remembered. He was laughing, crouched down, lifting onto his shoulders a little girl who looked about 2 or 3 years old. The girl laughed so hard she was almost out of breath. Colin held her firmly, tenderly, and said, "Hold on tight, Missy. Daddy's your airplane." Madison froze. Time seemed to stop. She wanted to look away, run, but she stood there motionless, watching. Seconds later, a woman approached, young with her hair tied back in a calm gaze. She touched Colin's arm and he turned and smiled. She kissed him lightly. The girl hugged them both, around the neck at the same time. It was a simple scene, but it tore her apart inside. A family, a new beginning, and Madison understood firsthand what it means to lose what you don't value. 2 days after that unexpected encounter at the market, Madison still felt the image of Colin with his daughter stuck in her mind like an open wound. Every detail of the scene replayed in her head like a silent punishment. She tried to ignore it. She tried to move on with her day, but her heart wouldn't let her. That night, alone, sitting on the edge of the bed in a small, lifeless apartment, she mustered the courage to look up his number. It was still saved on her phone. She pressed the call button with trembling fingers. When she heard his voice answer, it took her a few seconds to speak. "Colin, it's me." The silence on the other end lasted longer than she expected. When he finally responded, it was with a neutral tone. "What do you want?" She swallowed hard. "I saw you the other day at the market with the little girl. Is she your daughter?" "Yes," he replied directly. "Emma, she changed my life." Her voice faltered for a moment. "And the woman who was with you, is she your wife?" "It's Leah, the woman who showed me that I could still be truly loved." "Who came into my life when I had lost faith in any kind of fresh start?" Madison closed her eyes. I just called to say, I'm sorry for everything for what I did to you. I ruined the best thing I ever had." Once again, silence took over. But this time, Colin took a deep breath before responding. "You destroyed me, Madison. You threw me into the deepest pit without a second thought. But you know what? That's where I discovered who I really am. I rebuilt my life from the pieces you broke. And as painful as it was, I'm grateful because in the end, it's what set me free." She cried silently, trying to contain the pain. "Do you forgive me?" Colin thought for a moment. "I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't an invitation to come back. It's a goodbye without resentment." She tried to say something, but he cut her off. "Take care of yourself, Madison." "Really?" "Because those who don't learn from pain are doomed to repeat it." And he hung up. Madison stared at the phone screen as if she'd been slapped. For the first time, she didn't throw the phone to the ground. She didn't scream, she just sat there still, silent. For the first time, she understood what Colin had always tried to teach her, and what she never valued. Losing Colin wasn't the punishment, it was the consequence. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.